You,
Right. Well, looks like.
Well, you say hello and then put it on to me, and I'll introduce Tariq if you like.
You're already on, but
I just want to do the book first. That's all. I don't mind.
I think we should have a subcommittee to discuss the intro that we do today.
Do as I tell you.
Well, you're live, gentlemen.
Oh, are we live already?
When he said "F off," what he meant was a metaphorical excursion into the lands of...
all right, well...
of Tariq's swearing.
Hi, Jane. Thank you for coming. You missed Melvin swearing. He didn't realize where he was, so we'll try our best to delete some of these things out, shall we? And we'll give a few minutes. I know people have said to me that they're coming on. In the meantime, Pete.
Yeah, one of the most important things I find when we have these discussions is to find out just what everyone's drinking, because it does affect the flow of the conversation. Yeah. Okay, the pure vodka from Melvin in a very large glass. What are you on, Tariq?
Definitely water, but in a teacup.
Oh, a teacup. You've changed receptacles. Great. And I myself am on tea. Builder's tea. Get me
very nice. Up. Well,
hello, Jane. How you doing? Lovely, Jane. There you go.
Yeah. Are we getting anybody? Is anybody arriving, Tariq?
We are getting. I mean, we don't have to rush, but we'll give it a couple more minutes just in case. You can explain what we're waiting for.
Go on then, Tariq. Amuse us with some scintillating conversation while we wait.
Well, I think we don't have to wait, Muli, thank you very much for joining us.
Muli.
We've received your message from Trinidad, and we'll be coming to it, hopefully, during the course of our discussions.
Oh, right. Yeah, I've just switched this thing to live comments.
Clearest beer, Muli. Clearest beer.
Yes, and Athena, thank you from Rhodes. Welcome.
Athena.
Okay, folks, shall we give a few more minutes, a couple of more minutes, so we can get our tea? I can prove it's water, see?
There you go.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
So, Tariq, your hair's looking very neat today.
Combed it, mate. Combed it. Shall we kick off soon? Because people might be busy now. We've had 3 minutes, and slowly people can come in.
Mm-hmm. All right then. Shall I just launch off then, Pete?
Go for it.
All right. Okay. Welcome to Pandemicus. So today we're discussing the work of our esteemed colleague over here on my right or left or wherever he is, wherever he goes, Tariq Mehmood, and Tariq. Who's I think had a new haircut for this session by the looks of it, or certainly sponged it down nice. Tariq, out of the three of us, is certainly the most political writer, and he's active in a number of spheres. Political activist, educationalist, teaches creative writing in the American University in Beirut. Critic, a novelist, and a poet, all sorts of different things, and a novelist. And my lot, he also actually writes YA, which is a point of great interest because he writes political YA, and he writes very political YA. In fact, he's certainly, as I say, the most political one of us three. And Tariq, so just to start off, we're talking about You're Not Here, which is your latest YA book. Do you want to give us a quick overview of the book, so that those who haven't read it, if there's anyone out there who hasn't read it, can understand what we're talking about a little?
Yeah, first I think, Melvin, I'll take exception to some of the things you're saying. Really?
Oh, really?
Already, but really, I don't know of a YA book that's not political in itself. And
Yes. There's a difference between something which is political because it exists in a political environment and something which tackles things which are politically straight on.
Well, again, I have an issue because what things are straight on and what
Listen, interrupt people, please stop picking a fight now. Just give us the overview of the book first.
Okay.
Yeah.
Behold.
All right. Well, this book, the one that you are going to give me a grilling on, You're Not Here, is a sequel. This is a sequel to this book, Melvin, which you have read. In fact, you've read both of them. You're Not Proper. So, in a sense, these two books are linked to three of Peter Kalu's books as well, as we started writing a load of books around the issue of why young people or black people, people of color, are not represented in fiction enough. And we were so tired of the publishers, the publishing world of young adult literature being so utterly white that we decided to take the issues on head on. So the first story of You're Not Proper, out of which You're Not Here is born, this one is set in a town in the north of England, which is seething with racism, and two young girls are trying to find out who they are. Why are they there? Where do they come from? Why are they confronted with issues of Islamophobia, the new racism? Why the old racism? Why is my father a drunk? Why is there a secret in my family? Who on earth am I? One of the girls who tries to be white realizes the white gang in which she's a part of will not accept her. She wants to be a Muslim. And of course, the Muslim girls think she's white and she won't have her, and they won't have her. So her was an inner conflict. And of course, all this is not set in a world devoid in which we only drink curries and eat kebabs. But this is a world in which there are wars, there is unemployment, there is hunger, there is love, and there are a whole host of things. So in that sense, what I tried to do was set the story in a way, these two stories, which are interlinked, they're the same characters, they're growing up, in a way to tell a story of some of the big issues of our time. So here is, I think, that, and in my opinion, all stories tell something about the big issues of our time. And because of my own background, the background of my own children, so there was a very personal reason for writing the stories. Indeed, why me and you, Peter, in years before that, tried to create folklore, tell folklore, adapt folklore, and even publish folklore books, which you did a Nancy, you did a few others, Tiger Stew, and things like that. So in a way, what we were trying to do is to say that we must not only be fictional, visible in the stories of today, but actually the stories of yesterday are also our fictional visibility.
Just let me stop you there. I mean, I have to put you back to the question that we want to discuss the book, okay, a little bit, and you haven't mentioned it yet. You haven't told us the story yet. So I drag you screaming back to the point. And can you tell us a little about or do you want me to do it?
Well, I don't mind telling you. I mean, this is a story of a young boy called Luke. His brother went missing in Afghanistan in action. They both live in a northern English town. He's in love with a young girl called Layla. Layla's from Afghanistan. And for those two, the question of racism and a foreign war become inseparable for reasons that the story begins to look at, as indeed the role of the British military overseas and what happens to white working class communities in Britain.
Thank you. Great. Okay. So when you know, I mean, talking about what I would call political fiction, which is overtly political fiction, and looking at the sort of, I mean, it's a really difficult one to pick. I think it's the hardest thing to write because of there are so many traps, aren't there? You know, if you're putting forward views that you already have, it can sound very pedagogic. It can sound more like a lecture than an exploration, asking questions, which fiction does rather better than it does providing answers, I think. And when I look at most of the successful books in literature, I tend to think of Orwell or, Animal Farm, Brave New World, perhaps. books like this, which use fable and science fiction. Okay, and in YA, it's it's a bit of a rarity to take these issues head on. I think Robert Cormier did some work from sort of American servicemen returning home. Elizabeth Laird does some nice stuff, and I think the nearest comparison I can think is the great Robert Westall, who did a wonderful book called Gulf, which tried to bring that experience in the first Gulf War to children in that first Gulf War over here in a sort of by a telepathic trick. But all of those books all use some sort of I don't know, some sort of device. They're fables, they're science fiction, they have a fantasy element in some way. But your book, tackles it directly head on, contemporary fiction. And in it, you're dealing with Muslim extremism, you're dealing with armies, you're dealing with infiltration into the British Army. So, what's the advantage? Why did you pick this? Why didn't you go down the safer route of distancing it from it in the form of fable or science fiction and actually take the risks of talking about society as it exists on the ground today?
Because there was no need to pretend to teleport myself into a different world when my own world was so disjointed, so almost dystopian. When I lived with families, in fact, I met a mother once who went on marches to stop the British attacking Afghanistan and Iraq. If you go back in time a little bit, she was crying her son joined the army. And I think I knew the son when he was a little kid. So we're only dealing with 5-6 years. So the wars are not too far away. They're right next to us. Why do I have to teleport it out? And these are important techniques for writers. He was white. He wanted to talk about what was happening in Iraq. He wasn't Iraqi. He didn't know the pains of that place. You may say I'm not Afghani, but I have Kashmir. I have Pakistan. I've been there. I understand quite a lot of the cultural and the political and historical things. So in a way, I didn't feel that there's any need to. And why on earth do we have to hide in anything? Why not be straight up front? Be talk.
So that's interesting. I mean, as a white writer, I would probably feel a lot more wary about taking on, say, an Afghani role or a view or a Pakistani role, and that's something that you feel much more able to do, and that you probably are much more able to do because of your background. Do you think that's something that writers of colour can do more effectively than white British writers? Does that give you sort of a rare edge in writing this sort of fiction, or is it something that we should all aspire to? Should we sort of put our anxieties aside in this area and plunge in where you've led?
The novel You're Not Here, Melvin, is actually through the eyes of a white character.
Yes, I realise that, but it has got it does tackle it from the. I mean, it's actually spoken from the point of view of a white character, but it's very much also embedded in the life of Muslims in this country and in the Afghan war.
I've not been to Afghanistan, but yes, it is embedded in the Afghan war, because living in this society, I am involved in the Afghan war because I pay taxes, we pay monies, and the army from here goes and attacks people overseas. So the question of what you start off with about white writers, white writers are as much involved in the process of blackness, just from the other side of the coin. We are either in the belly of the beast or under its feet.
Well, this is undoubtedly true, but I think it's mainly white writers that try and find a way of wriggling out of dealing with it face on. And what I want to ask you is that should we sort of start dropping these devices, this telepathy, this science fiction, and these fables, and try and do what you've done, which is to take it right on directly, so that, for example, then it would mean someone such as me writing not just from the white perspective, but from the Muslim perspective in society. Something which a lot of white writers I know are very anxious about. You don't feel that's something that should worry us?
Well, there's two separate points to it, isn't it? Whether we employ the age-old techniques of storytelling. At the end of the day, we are almost like actors. We are artists. We are giving a sense of relief, taking people to different worlds. And even the creation of the so-called upfront world is in itself a creation, so it's not real, it's an imaginary. In both cases, we ask our readers to suspend their disbelief. So in one sense, that I don't think these are different. This is teleporting. This is, in a way, coming to terms with the world in which we live. And the second point of what the white writers ought to do or not to do. I think the time is when white writers see themselves as white writers. I think we're entering into problematic areas, in one sense as well, because that's an acceptance of the privileges of white privilege as well. So in a way, it's only because of our resistance, of the black people's resistance, that the questions of the relationship of white and black becomes under the scrutiny. What I try to do is to say, well, I've never looked at the world in which I'm living through white eyes, if you like. I've always tried to fight off the imprisoning gaze of whiteness, for the want of another thing. When I was young, I tried to hide in playgrounds from whiteness. I was constantly attacked, beaten up. My overriding experience in British schools was that, from being, bussed out and stuff. Not all bad now. You then see that these white characters are full of life. They're not inhuman. Even in their inhumanity, they're not inhuman. There's some degree, something that created them. And I think a lot of writers, black writers, and writers from the global South, we give humanity in a way without having to make fairy tale characters, the individualism of characters. I read Achebe's When Things Fall Apart the other day, and there's so many characters in the novel. They're popping in and out, and sometimes they're caricatures, sometimes they're real, because the overriding thing underneath is the advent of the white man. It's the advent of the European and European colonization. So here, and like my good friend Peter, who's very silent, he said yesterday, a very important point, that when we look at the Englishness in which we are unfortunately trapped, the Englishness isn't just in England. It stretches out of England. And when we deal with the wars, or whether we deal with history, and it comes here. So in this humble book of mine, what do? I know that Peter didn't like the cover of this. He said it's a great poster, but I loved it. In a way, what I was trying to say is that your army, your cities, your youth, they're all trapped within political and social forces. But in telling the story is a love story, no more, no less than something else. A love that's very fractured, a love that's very painful. How on earth are you going to fall in love when the houses of two areas are on fire? One's burning the other.
Okay, so you mentioned Englishness. Okay, and in your book, you're really tackling the two sides of this that we're seeing widely illustrated, I suppose, in the Black Lives Matters stuff, and the interpretation of history. How do we look at the nature of Englishness? And if you were to look at this this book, it's a very fractured thing. It's a very broken thing along religious lines, along lines of color and so forth. On the other hand, as you say, it is a love story, and we do have these two young people attempting to come together. Is that a deliberate thing? Do you? I suppose what I'm asking you is, how do you see Englishness today on the ground? How do you understand? Is there a healing process that is possible, even in the world in a world where we have racism with such deep historical roots?
I think nothing positive will come out of the rise of English nationalism. It's not like Scottish, it's not like Irish, not even like Welsh, or perhaps even if the Cornish ever get their act together. I don't think so, but we come on to that in a separate incident. Primarily why is because England is the cause of the pain, in the ruling classes of England. Now, but
well, that's true. But if I can, Orwell many years ago was trying to talk about coming to terms with being English. Okay, and there's a thing, isn't there? Coming to terms with being English. How do you express yourself as an English person? And for someone like me, you know, who has all the advantages, brought up in the 50s and 60s and so forth, you know, the Englishness which is presented to me is, you know, a privileged, you know, this sense of sort of superiority, all those kind of things, which I may question. But I mean, nevertheless, we live in a world in which the nation state is, as it were, the political unit. So English nationalism, you talk about that as a right-wing phenomenon, but what I'm sort of trying to get you to talk about, I suppose, is there another way of looking at Englishness? Is there a way forward in which we could look at being English, not in terms of the right wing, not in terms of English nationalism in the sense that you were talking to it about, but in the future in a form which does encompass the people in it, and which allows us to sort of think about our country, because it is all of our country, in a more positive way, which doesn't include this sort of imperialist history.
I don't think we can exclude the imperial history of England, but what the England can't have an Independence Day. Who is it going to get independence from? Scotland can, Ireland can, and I ought to be united sooner rather than later. Wales can, and multitude of other nations. There is always historically a problem with the dominant group's nationalism. It's not just something peculiar to England, but an imperial history tied to a dominant group that causes a lot of other things. But how do we deal with it within a story? You mentioned earlier on, you know, it's not a pamphlet, it's a love story. A love story has its own vicissitudes. But one of the things I wanted to look at, it's one thing to say, hey, look, Saddam Hussein's armies are hiding behind people, hiding among civilian areas. It's okay to bomb them. I saw this on the television. The BBC, or was it Channel 4, or was it ITV? They reported a bombing raid on a public meeting of Ba'ath Party in Iraq, and said, and it was acceptable that they were hiding. Well, I live a few yards away from the Territorial Army, and that's a British Army unit, not far from another regimental. So we have the army completely engrossed in this society. And you mentioned another point, and yesterday in our pre-discussion about today, that there's a holy cow in this country. Don't criticize the British Army. And the British police get away with a lot, but the British Army historically has got away with a lot. Why not? When their soldiers go slaughter us, and us now is not too far away. I am both the East and the West. I'm an embodiment of both of those. You may say, well, why the hell? Well, you won't. But how many times have I heard in my life, if you don't like England, leave? I'd love to, but how do I get England out of me? I can't. So in that sense, the embracing of our fictional world. So what I try to do in this novel is a continuation, as I mentioned, of You're Not Proper. Is that, you've got young people, some go to war, some stay here. But what happens to those who then don't agree with that war? I live in a middle class area, but I can tell you in working class white communities, it was serious levels of aggression and violence against those who did not accept that the soldiers should be out because, oh no, we got to protect the army because we're in times of war. We're not in bloody war. England's not in war. England's at war. These are the differences. Now, you cannot have this war without racism. They're not fighting white people. They're not slaughtering 1 million white people in Germany. They might have done that before, and they would have done the same here. It's Iraqis. It's Afghans. And I can't think of a time when the army of this country in the last 300 years or maybe longer has not been occupying and fighting somewhere or other. Or perhaps our viewers can correct me. But let's not talk down the road of bitterness. my attempt in this novel, You're Not Here, was really trying to understand what is racism and the war doing to white people. And in that, I try to deal an awful lot with working class white humor as well, as I've seen it over the years.
Well, shall I just pause you there? And one of the questions I wanted to ask you was about humour. But before we get on to Northern humour, one of the things that we mentioned very early on about stereotyping, and one of the symptoms, if you like, of racism is stereotyping. And I noticed that in your book you do undermine stereotypes quite a bit. For example, the character Peter is like no one I've ever met. However, talking about this use of stereotypes, I know that we do have we have a little video, don't we, to show people from Mully, perhaps talking about how we approach characters and how we deal with stereotypes as writers. It might be interesting to listen to that now. Do you think? And then after that, we can go on to discuss Northern humour before Pete takes over.
Is that all right with you, Pete?
Hi. I think that we as writers have work to do, particularly if we were raised not only in the West, but also in a society that was formerly colonised. It's very easy to slip into stereotypes of characters and not realise that we're writing in a racist way. We've been conditioned, and it's our job to constantly do better as writers and to challenge ourselves, question what we're writing and why we're writing it, and checking the validity. If a writer says to me, "But that's just how things are, I'm writing the truth," I ask the writer to really think about the connotations of that truth. Where did it come from? Whose truth is it? This also feeds into publishing on what's acceptable to the large publishers. For a long time, certainly in the North, it was gangs, guns and drugs, because that's just the way it was in Manchester, let's say. We have to remind those publishers that communities are made up of men, women and children in all their complexities, and that we have lives.
So that's a great point from Mully, isn't it? And it reflects what something that I did want to talk to you about, which is, breaking those stereotypes and trying to show ways of, particularly, tackling them face on and trying to make vibrant, interesting, colourful, characters who don't fit in easily into the categories of racist stereotypes. Could you tell us a little bit about some of those in your own book?
Yeah, thank you very much, Mully Amie. And she's sent us the message from Trinidad, a friend, a colleague, and a writer. Well, I think that the question, she's raising a lot of different important points in the thing. That one of the things is that, on the one hand, we try to negate the stereotypes, but on the other hand, we are creating stereotypes as well, in that sense. And I was so busy playing, making sure that all of your faces were off whilst Mully was talking. I missed a few points in there, though I heard her before. So
she was talking about the questioning and challenging stereotypes and thinking about where they come from and so forth. And I was asking you, you've got a number of people in your book. I'd like you to ask, what I really want to ask you, I suppose, is characters like Peter, beer drinking Afghan, okay, where do you get these characters from? How do you conjure them up, and what makes you pick them?
I lived with them, I drank with them. I mean, I had a friend. If he's watching, he knows who he is. He's now gone gracefully old and changed his habit. He would keep all fasts during the holy month, and for some reason which we never worked out, on the last fast he would end up in the pub. I've never understood why he did that. And some of my friends had beards down here, bellies carried on growing, and they like the beer. It's quite simple. And you've got to understand that there isn't a religious issue here. People are people. I mean, we are multitude of contradictions. But because I was looking for people who may not know, I have a Peter Khan as a character within. Is his name Peter Khan? Isn't it?
Peter Khan.
Yeah, of course, it's not his name, but many of us, those especially of us who came here with the beautiful names like Fakhr, we had to call ourselves Peters. That was one of the understandable points. But so he was very much a living character. He's the father of Layla, who's having a cloak and dagger love affair with Luke, trying to avoid the hockey sticks of her brothers, who in turn are chasing after white women in some corners. But these are the contradictions of our times. And how many times have I come across them? I don't know. And I think that I've lost count. So in a way, but the important thing is the burden of history we carry as people of colonized worlds and living in Britain. And I think that's the big weighty point within which also what Muli is talking about. It's not something we can leave ever, wherever we may be. It runs in our fiction as much as it runs in our lives.
Okay. I see that it's gone 5:30. Pete's I see wrecking his studio there. I seem to think. Thank you, Tariq. A very quick final question. I mean, there's loads more things I could ask you about this book, but I'd just like you to tell us a little bit about the humour, what you call Northern humour, which I should say, it's a hard book. There's the army, there's Muslim militancy, there's actual infiltration into the army, which is quite a frightening thing. But there's also a lot of humour in it, as well as there being a love story. Could you just tell us a little bit about Northern humour, please? And
one of the things is the Northern humour is also class humour. I grew up working with a lot of working class friends, and if you look very carefully without my glasses, you will see my eyes are a bit cross-eyed. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, when I have a soft spot in those days, rather, I used to have a soft spot for beer.
Just while we're at it, Tariq, there's also Melvin's question has been brutal. Yeah, you need to wipe the blood from your face. Thank you.
Oh God, I shaved just before I came on. Do you want to hang on until I go get a tissue?
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, we'll talk amongst ourselves.
Yeah. So you're doing a marvelous job there, Melvin, but you've been a bit harsh. The man's breaking out in stigmata.
I know, I've given him a nosebleed or something like that. I'm sure that your questions will soothe him gently into a lullaby.
Well, I have been bloodied.
I can only apologise for the severity of my question.
I tell you, I've been bloodied on the streets.
From the mouth.
I have been bloodied on the streets of Britain, but never in a bloody interview.
Well, there you go.
There you go.
Next time, pal.
Well, your turn is coming.
Next time.
Yes, indeed, I'll answer the question. So I went to
Humour.
a bar.
Yeah, humour. We're on humour. Just cue you.
We're on very quick humour.
For those who've just joined us, we're talking about Tariq being rather cross-eyed.
Oh God. Anyway, I've just realized that Peter's been sending me private messages in this chat. Wipe that blood off your face. I'm sorry, Peter. I didn't see the messages.
Yes, I didn't notice it. He talked hard of hearing, but I'm as blind as a bat. So I can't see.
Let us not give all our secrets away. But me and you are also dyslexic.
Don't ask.
Okay, so right. So just to give you an example, firstly, humor is not devoid of class positions. So my love is of Northern English working class humor, as much as my hatred as well, because sometimes it was full of racism and unacceptable and quite violent in many ways. So I would go to a pub, and this happened to me more than one. I shall just give you one example. I went into a pub and I sort of looked at the barman to get served. And at the bar was a big, tall man, a big belly, the 18-pint belly that you used to have, big belly. And he had a tiny young woman next to him, his girlfriend. And it was quite a bit of a stereotype that these big men always had these tiny little girls, women. Anyway, I waited and waited, and the man was looking at me, and the woman was looking at me, and they both had pint glasses in their hand. And the man said, "Oi, what are you looking at my girlfriend for?" And I wasn't. I was looking at the barman, but clearly the barman thought as well that I was looking at his girlfriend because I'm cross-eyed. I said, "I'm not." And then she goes, "Why not?" And I thought, then there was a group of women sitting next to them. They must all have been from the same place. And I was sort of lost, by the comment she made. And one of the women turned around and says, "Don't blame you, mate. She's had more pricks in her than a second-hand dartboard." And in a way, not the best and not the most poetic, but these are a big group of friends, and they all found it was very funny. I was just relieved to get my pint and go in a corner and sit somewhere. So one of the things about the Northern English humor, or the one I certainly grew up with,
I should add for anyone listening that particular joke isn't contained in Tariq's YA novel, You're Not Here.
Yes, it's a reflection of some of our past, and in a way, the crudity question is a class question. If you live in the dirt, if you work in dreadful conditions, you're not going to be sitting there and putting John Keats's phrases left, right, and center. Your poetry is the poetry of your profanity, with which you've negated the powers that be. So I actually fell in love with all the dirty filth, because I don't know of a time when I worked in any of the mills or factories where people were very couth and sort of right on, blurted out. Now, having said that, it didn't mean that you gave carte blanche to racism, because the negative side of English humor, it was always putting the Irish down. It was putting us down. But there was also a positive side, and this book is full of them. The characters in the book, that I created them from memory. I didn't have to really look very far. I used to either fight them or laugh with them.
Okay, great. Thank you, Tariq. And I recommend Tariq's book, You're Not Here, to anyone listening. It's, as I say, although Tariq insists all books are political, you're not going to find anything more directly political and that deals with those issues more face on than Tariq's book there. So, Pete, if you finished smashing up your virtual studio there, I don't know what it was that was going down, but I'll hand over to you, and Pete's going to talk about Tariq's other book. Both of these are on offer at the moment, which is one reason why we're doing this. Song of Gulls Arena. Pete, can you hear Pete?
No, but Pete.
Yes, I'm here. I'm here. I'm glad you missed me. Normally you're like, "Great, Pete's gone. We can have a proper conversation now." But we're going to go for an interview. But I wanted to pick up from Sabji. Sorry, Tariq, need some more feminist jokes, please. So there's some craft work that we've got for our next pandemic.
I think Sabjit is right in a way. But, I'm not here telling jokes. It's a reflection of a memory. And yes, memory can be plucked and memory can be conceived as neutral. And of course, I'm a firm believer that profanity and itself, but that's going to go into a totally different direction. But she has a right that humor in itself shouldn't denigrate women. And very often in the sort of, when we told jokes, again, I'm going to end up being told off. Our jokes were ridiculously demeaning to ourselves in many ways, or on surface. But underneath it all, it was regaining the humanity of those who were telling.
Yeah. That's that works very well with Mulia Maya's point, actually. But let us turn to the novel Song of Gulls Arena. Tariq, because not everybody will have read it, could you give us a brief overview of what happens in it?
Yes, this novel, The Song of Gulls Arena, it is about a 70-odd-year-old man who has grown up a large chunk of his life in Manchester, in England, and that scene is from Manchester, who's lived a life from here, and he becomes a suicide bomber in Manchester, sets out to destroy the very city that has given him a place to live and has hosted him, has helped him where his child was born. And he has never known a sense of peace. His father, and you find this information very early on, he's not a religious man, has nothing to do with Islam. In fact, he's a complete atheist. And he sets out for a whole series of events that happen in his life, from racism on the streets of Britain to the factories, to his own betrayal of his beloved in the village, to her coming over to, and the whole processes that go on to what happens in Pakistan, what happens in Afghanistan, how Pakistan, Afghanistan, Britain, Manchester, the whole places are not out there. They're all in here. And he is in here and he's out there. So it traces generations. And if you've grown up in a never-ending war, what world are you going to live in?
Thank you. First, I'd just like to say that I love the book. Let me just say that on a personal note. It's a brilliant book. It's a fascinating book. And it's well worth reading. It speaks very well for itself. And so there isn't any particular pressure on you as the author to represent the book. The best thing is the book itself. And however, whatever you say about the book and however you interpret it, I think the best thing always is to go to the book itself. The book will speak its own voice very adequately, I'm sure. But to allow you to comment on the book, even though you're just the author, let me turn to my first question, which is that there are a number of variances with the norm in your book. And one of the largest variances I see is that you have set it not just in England, but in Afghanistan, in Pakistan. And you do know, do you not, that there is a general rule, thou shalt not set a book in two places. And if thou want the book to be published by the UK publishers, thou shalt make sure it is based primarily in England. Were you aware?
No, I have no idea.
Well,
why didn't you tell me this before when you were editing it?
Well, sometimes you have to. The second thing is, it's not only a transgression in terms of the commercial success or otherwise, though it's done very well as a book. But nevertheless, from a commercial point of view, it's not wise to set a book in Afghanistan, Pakistan, as well as England. You're meant to set it in New York or Amsterdam or Paris, somewhere that is a popular place in the Western imaginary as being a place they want to go, so they can vicariously go there by means of the book. You haven't done that. Furthermore, it's set in the north. I mean, do you not realize that everything happens in London in England? In fact, most people don't know anywhere outside of it, inside of England, other than London. And now, please, and I beg you to be as honest as possible, because I know the facts. I'm asking you the question, but I do actually know the answer. And I may correct you if you don't get this answer correct yourself. But why was it set in the north?
I live here.
Very good. It's one layer of an answer, but the book came out of a program, didn't it? It took 5 years to write. And
that's true. That's true. It took 11 years to write.
You're getting my.
I got your point. That's very true. And it's not all set in the north. There's a big chunk of it in London as well, but clearly your memory has faded over the years. But yes, it was part of my PhD novel, which I did at Lancaster University. Though the writing of the novel is over 11 years, maybe more, it was also exercising some trauma of what I had seen in my own life. Both, I worked in Pakistan as a journalist once, and I was on the border in the city called Peshawar, a beautiful, wonderful ancient city, crossroads to many a civilization and many a war and many a horror, and a great place for lovers as well. And I saw during the first Afghan war when the British and the Americans and the Germans, the West and all its acolytes were fighting against the Russians who had occupied Afghanistan. And I was working as a journalist in there. And actually, some of the horrors that I've described in the book, which really the name Gulzarina, the woman whose life story I tried to tell, I'd forgotten that I'd actually, whilst not having met her, I thought the incidents that I'd fictionalized, I'd created out of my imagination, till a friend of mine said, "No, you haven't. This is what happened." Then, of course, it changed. When I began to rewrite it, he said, "No,
Well,
no."
It's an interesting area, and I'd like to, if we get time, to go into that idea of Gulzarina and who she is, and obviously it's in the title, Song of Gulzarina. But I do recall the nervousness, the alacrity with which the funding body watched you accept the commission to write about the North, and promptly vamoose off to Pakistan, where you stayed for a couple of years.
At least.
Well, it's an important thing that I think you set about to do. In that, for me, you were saying that, yeah, the North has been made by, if we want its polar opposite, the South, that the North was built on various things. And one of the things that it has been built on and with is that migration from that area of Pakistan. So at the same time, you have within the language of Song of Gulzarina quite a northern, would you say it's Yorkshire? Or would you say it's Manchester? The sort of dialect, if you like, a kind of local version of standard English.
I think, let me stop you for a minute, Pete. Firstly, the north of England cannot exist without what the British colonials did in India and the northwest of South Asia. The cotton, they used to cut people's thumbs off for making cotton, for weaving. The huge Afghan wars, that the three major wars that the British Army waged, there might be somebody's past where there are other people's present to this date. So in a sense, I didn't see, and this is where you're right, as a geographical division in the world of literature. Why should I? Why should I put a brick wall that has to be crossed by at minimum an aeroplane? Why? When I can actually move between them. Yes.
So this then touches upon the character Salim. It touches upon many things, but let us take the character Salim, because coming back to Melvin's point, he's looking a little exhausted. He's landed all his jabs on you, but I'll carry on, Melvin. The character Salim, as a construction, you say he's old. He's an atheist. He has other, we can call them habits or idiosyncrasies that do not fit any generalized idea of what a person whose name is Salim might be in, let us guess, in the white imaginary, in white imagination. So to what extent is that a reflection of the heterogeneity, the complexity of the people you meet in everyday life, as opposed to the people that white people construct in their imaginations? In other words, how? Anyway, I'll leave it like that. I don't want to.
Well, I don't think, Pete. I think it's. I don't want to tell a story that white people wish to hear. I want to tell a story that I wish to tell a story of. My story is not white. My story is not without whites. My story is a complicated world that isn't yet over and it won't be over after I'm over, in one sense. So my construction of a character, it changed as well from the PhD novel to by the time it becomes into publication and all, and your hatchet jobs on it as well. You forget how much damage you caused me when you made me fundamentally rewrite, and that's 2 years work. It wasn't a couple of weeks, that I could just change something. And that was both in terms of character as well as shifting the whole focus of telling.
That's a technical thing, and very, very briefly for the writers who are listening, I felt that it was over distance when Tariq used a journalist as the narrator, and so I said to him, get rid of the idea of the journalist, too over distance, and I feel he pulled it off with the right kind of distance of the author from the character now in the version he's got. But when Tariq speaks, you will hear the passion with which he speaks, and the craft of writing sometimes is how to temper that passion and make it aesthetically pleasing, if you like, so that the reader wants to read on. But that's a side issue. Where I'm going really with this, and a word I want to drop on Melvin, is the idea of the post nation, of the fact that my mother's Danish, my father's Nigerian. I live in Manchester. I just went with my Iranian friend to a Turkish shop, and the Turkish owner said, "Where are you from?" And and we're all looking at each other in some kind of Mexican standoff. Where are we from? Because the complexity of our characters is that we can't really align with one idea of nationhood. We're post-nation. We're people who don't sit easily with the idea of one narrow nationalism. And I feel that Salim does that so well, that he sits within both, or if there's two, but within both the sort of Western practices and within Pakistani practices. And
so actually, can I make a query here, since this is very interesting, and it kind of bears on one thing that I was saying about the nature of being English, and you're saying, well, it isn't English anymore; it's much bigger than that. One thing that sort of I really noticed about Salim was that he is sort of buffeted by all these different things. He's buffeted by his Englishness, and he's buffeted by his Pakistani stuff, and he's buffeted by those experiences in Afghanistan. And in many ways, he felt to be a sort of victim of his circumstances rather than someone who was very active in it. Now, was that something that you were aware of, Tariq, or was it something that just happened?
I think some of these things, Melvin, happen.
I did your interview there. Apologies.
No. Some of these things, I think he's asking a similar question. Some of these things are accidental. If I pretend it's because of my brilliance, that would be a lie. Sometimes our brilliance is bullshitting on a piece of paper. But one of the things I keep going on about the color and is the white and black and English and this and that, the constructs themselves. I was in Pakistan once, and I went to buy some tomatoes from the local market, and I could hear the shopkeepers. I was wearing these sunglasses, and I could hear these shopkeepers saying that "Gore-ai," the white people are coming, or "Gore-ai, a white man's here." And I thought, I looked around and I couldn't see him. And I thought, what is this? And I think Pete's already had that experience. And it took me a few minutes, really. I just went to buy tomatoes. I didn't want a geopolitical debate with a poor man selling me a kilo of tomatoes.
That's and then interesting.
I suppose I realized it was me. I was the white man.
Yeah. I suppose what I'm asking, is that if you looked at, say, sort of a white English nationalist, they'd be fighting for something, wouldn't they? Be fighting for a vision of something. Whereas you guys, you're sort of post-nation, as Pete says. You're sort of Iranian, Turkish, Danish, Pakistan, Nigerian, Antarctica, for all I know. So does that make it? In a world where the nation state is still the sort of major political locus, if you like, and political statement. Does does that sort of in any way make it difficult to see what you're for politically?
Well, I think the point is complete.
Socialists and politically on the left or communists.
No,
But I mean,
no.
you know, how does that impact? Has that got anything to do with the fact?
I think what happens is, instead of saying my country right or wrong, we say what is the morally right thing to do, because nationalism is a distortion of moral principle. But I want to thank you for your contribution, Melvin, but I'm coming back to Tariq because you're not slipping off from this question. No, Mr. Tariq, no. It's a very important question. You've written this book primarily in English, in fact, almost exclusively in English. Why? And where? I'm looking at the first paragraph, and I remember editing this. We edited it for weeks and weeks. What is the decision path that makes you write in English, one? And two, could you describe how the other languages, infuse the English text?
It's such a difficult question you actually asked, Pete. Quite an emotive one as well for me. I'll come back to Melvin later. Well, firstly, I'm completely in love with Sufi poetry and the poetry in particular of Bulle Shah, 500 years old, of Shah Hussain, 500 years old, of Mia Muhammad. These are who is probably published his main work in about 105, and one of the modern poets, Shiv Kumar Bitalvi. And unbeknown to me, when I was young, I was constantly singing the same sort of songs. And I never realized that almost all of those were written by one writer, the modern songs they were. And these songs are they're dripping with metaphors, I have, this is a very famous song of his sung by Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan, very famous poem.
Are you going to sing it?
No. Mai ni mere geetan de naina vich birhon di radak pave. Oh mother, in the eyes of, I'm just doing an impromptu translation, oh mother, in the eyes of my songs, there is the irritation of separation, if you like, of a lover. The implication being, another line is, I have made strips out of moonlight, soaked them in scent, tied them to my head, but the pain won't go. So in a way,
let me come back.
I'm coming back to the language. I'm coming back to the language. That in a way, the question of language then is that the way we talk, the metaphors of these poems constantly bombard me when I try to sit down to write, sometimes consciously, but very often unconsciously. That I've heard them, I've read them so many times that I can't help but to take, and something comes over, and these words keep hitting me and coming at me in different directions, and they affect the language. Now, I do also write in my own language, and the question of English, of course, it's we are prisoners of it, but also we can make weapons out of the bars of our prison as well. So I choose, and also I've lived here now pretty much most of my life. So the prison bar of the linguistic imperialism is now also my tool of fighting back.
Yeah, it's an interesting dilemma. I don't know how to write. But what I was thinking about, coming back to Melvin's point about fracture and listening to your or watching as you translate from one language to another live in front of this vast audience, is we're in triple figures at least, is that the question becomes, is it actually possible to translate how one set of people see the world to another set of people, and the dialogue within your novel, within Song of Gulzarina, is if we look at that question, is an attempt. Maybe it's in the sense that Salim ends up as a suicide bomber. It's a failed attempt to try to find the language which enables him to communicate with both, if we choose that polar, you know, the both cultures, if you like. Now, the difference with You're Not Here, and I would say the difference here with You're Not Here is that it's the YA genre, and the YA genre has as one of its demands that we don't make too grim a world for the young people. I don't know if I'm being a bit too prescriptive here, Melvin, but there is the difference between You're Not Here is it ends without mass slaughter. That's at least, you know, it ends. It's a love story, and there's a love story there. There's hope. There's a lot more hope in You're Not Here than in Song of Gul's Arena, I would say. Now, Tariq, my last question, and I'll hand you over to Melvin, so get your hanky ready, is who are you? Are you the author of You're Not Here, or are you author of Song of Gul's Arena? Are you the optimist or the pessimist?
Well, I don't agree that the Gul's Arena, though you are right, that is one of the criticisms many a friend has put to me. And in fact, I'm under a little bit of pressure to rewrite the ending for a new for the new edition, and I'm almost conceded defeat, but I haven't completely given up yet. And part of me feels that maybe my friends are right in what they say. But you know, who am I? I don't think we actually I can answer you that question. But what I can say, going back also to a point which I feel has been left in Melvin, who said that we are reacting against, and that English nationalism can say we are for. Actually, English nationalism is fighting for the maintenance of white supremacy, for the dominance of England, for the denial of so-called rights of England. That's not the case from our point of view. Our point of view is that we are the ones who are fighting for the liberation of history from these very forces. So even when we negate that which seems so obvious, the negation of that negation is our sort of a stance against these forces of backwardness, of reaction. So what I've tried to do with Gul's Arena in the ending, before we let Melvin, and I've got my tissue ready, Pete, I think that when I wrote You're Not Here, and but incidentally, for those who have time to read Sarbjeet's review, it was a very moving review, very close to the heart of the novel, and critical also of me as well in some of the shortcomings of the book, as well as indeed there is no, I cannot write without shortcomings. So in a sense, so I think I'll stop on that and let we just about going over and then finish with Melvin's comments.
Well, I think there's been enough blood on the camera lens there, Tariq, and so I think we can say thank you very much for your comments. And there's an interesting remark here by Athena, Tariq. Perhaps as a resident techie, you could put it up there. Yeah, perhaps a comment on that.
Well, can you read it? Because I'm
not talking about the right color. Hang on a minute. There we go. Not talking about the right color or origin of the writer, but about the right mentality of the writer, which is a point you raised, Tariq. A writer carries a great responsibility. There are these writers who can succeed in awakening the minds of their readers and show them the travesties of our world and make them think. Well, I suppose if you're writing political fiction, that's one's aim. Would you say?
Well, I think, thank you, Athena. I think that it's something where Peter had asked similar lines, which I didn't get down to, that about the question of translation between languages and experiences. And I think that as writers, we are translators. It doesn't matter what language we write, because our experience is a translation of something. And I think if we can't, it's not our job to add more problems. And it's not necessarily a job to give solutions, but certainly, to lay the basis in the stories that we construct, to show some elements of your own lives. And in the showing of your own lives, perhaps to show some degree of a solution, some degree of humanity, even if it means passing of a bit of time. Just like when we listen to a nice song, it takes a bit of pain, even if the song is painful, but it helps us to cope with the issues and the pressures of the time. And that's all I was certainly trying to do. But it was 11 years, Gulzarina, and bucket loads of tears, really.
Yeah.
I found it really very, very difficult writing subjects so close to my heart.
From your experience, of course. I mean, I would just say, Athena, that yes, if you occasionally you've written a book and you get a letter from someone saying, "Oh, yeah, it's changed the way I look at the world and it's changed the way I think about things," and there is no better comment, even if that's just from one person. And of course, when you are writing, and all of Tariq's work comes in the end from this, personal experiences and political reaction to it. Of course, sometimes that can have a profound effect on the reader. Pete? Anything?
I guess right to say, is this possible? Is this how it is right now? Is this the best we can do? And is there an alternative that we should head towards? And I don't know if we have answers, but we try to ask the right questions, I think, for moving things along.
Yeah, I agree. It's novels don't provide many answers, but you can answer the right questions. If you can ask the right questions, that's the thing.
Right. Shall we say goodbye to everyone and thank you very much?
Thank you, Tariq. Thank you, everyone.
And thank you for all your time preparing. I thought you were meant to be a bit more nicer than what you ended up coming across, but my turn is coming.
I've got a paper here which all full crossing out of all the questions which I could have asked. Those were nice ones.
Your turn is coming as well, Melvin. In due time, we'll be looking at his work. And don't worry, Pete, I have got my own axe grinding to be done when your books come up. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pete. It's usually rock stars who wreck the studio, but people have...
All right. Thank you for all our viewers now. Goodbye.
Thank you.